Your iPhone has features on it right now that Apple built, shipped, and quietly moved on from without telling most users they existed. Not buried Easter eggs or developer tricks that require root access or technical expertise. Actual, useful, finished features that are sitting in your settings menus waiting to be turned on. A developer posted a clip of one of these features in action earlier this year, and it generated 1.8 million views on X and 35,000 likes, because people who had been using their iPhones every single day for months genuinely had no idea it was there. That's 6 features in this video. At least one of them will change something you do on your phone every day before you've finished watching. Here's why hidden iPhone features exist in the first place, because this isn't random. Apple ships operating system updates with a relatively small number of headlining features that get announced at WWDC or at product launch events, and a considerably larger number of smaller improvements that go out quietly with point releases throughout the year. iOS 26, which shipped in September 2025, had its own announcement moment, but iOS 26.3, 26.4, and 26.5, which landed across the following months without press conferences or keynotes, collectively shipped over a dozen features that most iPhone users never heard about because there was no event to hear about them from. One of them closed a security gap that the FBI had specifically warned about in a published advisory. One of them added a privacy control that had never existed before for any iPhone user. And most of the people running these updates tapped the notification, waited for the install to finish, and went back to using their phones exactly as they had before, completely unaware that the update had changed anything meaningful. Let's start with the feature that went viral and still has a substantial proportion of iPhone users who've never turned it on. It's called call screening. It shipped with iOS 26, and its full impact only becomes clear when you understand the specific problem it was built to solve. When an unknown number calls your iPhone, the current default behavior is simple. The phone rings, you see an unfamiliar number, and you have approximately 2 seconds to decide whether to answer or decline based on nothing more than whether you recognize the digits. You either answer and potentially expose yourself to a scam call, or you decline and potentially miss something important. Neither option gives you the actual information you'd need to make a genuinely informed decision, which is why so many people simply don't answer unknown numbers at all, creating the separate problem of missing calls from doctors, contractors, delivery services, and anyone else calling from a number you haven't saved. Call screening solves this by inserting an AI-powered step between the incoming call and your phone actually ringing. When an unknown caller dials your number, iOS 26 intercepts the call before it reaches you and prompts the caller to state their name and the reason for the call. Your phone never rings. The caller hears a message explaining that the person they're trying to reach uses a screening service, and on your screen, you see a live transcript of exactly what they say in real time. If the caller says, "Hi, this is Dr. Martinez's office calling to confirm your appointment tomorrow," you answer. If the caller says nothing, or starts speaking in a way that sounds automated or scripted, you let it go to voicemail with complete information about why it's not worth your time. The feature works entirely from iOS with no third-party app required, and the transcript it produces is saved, so you can review it even after the call ends. The reason this particular feature resonated so strongly when it was first demonstrated is that it inverts the power dynamic of an unknown call. Previously, the caller had all the information and you had none. You could choose to answer and find out who's calling at the cost of potentially engaging with a scam. Or you could not answer and remain uninformed. Call screening means the caller has to identify themselves before your phone even alerts you to their existence. A legitimate caller identifies themselves, gets through, and everyone's time is respected. An illegitimate caller faces a screening process that's specifically designed to be friction for automated systems and reluctant for human scammers who don't want to state their fraudulent purpose out loud for recording. The feature is turned off by default, which is why most iPhone users have never seen it. To enable it, navigate to Settings, then Apps, then Phone, then Call Screening, and toggle it on. You can also choose whether to screen all unknown callers or only those flagged as potential spam by iOS's carrier integration. The second feature solves a problem that every iPhone user has encountered, but most people have accepted as an unchangeable aspect of how the phone works. For decades, the iPhone's alarm snooze duration has been exactly 9 minutes. 9 minutes, not 5, not 10, not a duration you chose or were consulted about, but 9 minutes established by Apple as the single fixed option with no documented reason why that specific number was chosen, and no way to change it without using a workaround. iOS 26 added custom snooze duration to the clock app, and in aggregated user feedback tracked across Reddit, McRumors, and tech forums through the first quarter of 2026, this is consistently rated as one of the most immediately appreciated of all iOS 26's hidden features, with a 92% satisfaction rate among users who discovered and enabled it. 9 minutes is gone. You now set the snooze duration to whatever interval actually matches how you use alarms. 5 minutes if you want to wake up in steps, 20 minutes if you need a genuine second sleep window or anything in between. To change it, open the clock app, tap the alarm you want to modify, tap Edit, and look for the snooze duration option below the repeat settings. Tap it and set it to whatever value works for your morning routine. The change applies per alarm rather than globally, which means you can have different snooze durations for a weekday alarm and a weekend alarm, which is a level of personalization that the 9-minute default never allowed. The fact that this feature existed for over a decade with no official explanation for why 9 minutes was the only option, and that its addition to iOS 26 generated genuine enthusiasm among users who had simply accepted the limitation, illustrates exactly how these hidden features accumulate. They're improvements to things that were always slightly wrong, made so quietly that many users never discovered the improvement was made. The third feature is where this video shifts from quality of life improvements to something considerably more serious, because the third feature is about a specific documented security vulnerability that the FBI addressed in a public advisory in December 2024, and that iOS 26.5 closed on May 11th, 2026. The advisory from the FBI, issued alongside the NSA and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, warned that RCS messaging, which is the modern communication standard that replaced SMS as the foundation for text messaging on Android phones, and which Apple adopted for iPhone with iOS 18 in 2024, had a significant encryption gap when used for messages between iPhones and Android phones. Within Android-to-Android communication through Google Messages, RCS is end-to-end encrypted. But cross-platform, meaning iPhone to Android and Android to iPhone, the encryption wasn't consistently applied. The FBI advisory specifically recommended that users switch to dedicated encrypted messaging apps for sensitive communications precisely because of this gap. iOS 26.5 addressed this directly by implementing end-to-end encryption for RCS messages sent between iPhone and Android devices, using an updated implementation of the RCS standard. Before this update, a text message from your iPhone to an Android user, even when marked as an RCS message rather than a traditional SMS, could theoretically be read at the carrier. Infrastructure level. Your carrier, a government entity with appropriate legal authorization, or a sophisticated attacker with access to telecom infrastructure, could read the content of that message. After iOS 26.5, those messages are encrypted in transit in a way that the carrier cannot read, a server cannot decrypt, and a third party cannot intercept in usable form. For the billions of iPhone to Android conversations happening daily, this is a meaningful security improvement that most users have no idea was needed or has now been provided. The encryption activates automatically when you're texting an Android user who has Google Messages as their default SMS app with RCS enabled, which is the default configuration for most Android phones in 2026. From your perspective, the green bubble looks the same. From a security architecture perspective, the message is now protected in a way it wasn't before. To verify your phone is running iOS 26.5 or later and has this protection active, navigate to Settings, then General, then About, and check your iOS version. If you're on 26.5 or higher, the cross-platform encryption is in place. If you're on an earlier version of iOS 26, updating is the direct path to closing the gap the FBI specifically named in its advisory. The fourth feature addresses a category of location tracking that many iPhone users didn't realize was happening, and whose existence reveals something important about the difference between what your phone's location settings control and what they don't control when you turn off location services. For an app, or even turn off location services entirely in your iPhone settings, you're controlling one specific mechanism through which apps and services determine your physical location. The GPS and Wi-Fi positioning system that feeds data to apps through iOS's location services framework. What you're not controlling is something fundamentally different. Your carrier's ability to determine approximately where you are based on which cell towers your phone is connecting to. Your carrier knows which towers your phone talks to at all times, because that's a technical requirement of how cellular networks function. By triangulating tower connection data, carriers can determine your location with varying degrees of precision, and that location information is separate from the location service's data that your privacy settings govern. Carriers have sold this data, have been compelled to provide it to government agencies, and have used it for analytics purposes that most users would object to if they knew the practice existed. iOS 26.3 added a setting that allows users to limit the precision of carrier location data for the first time. Navigate to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Location Services, then scroll to the bottom, then System Services, then Carrier Location Precision. Setting this from precise to approximate means that while your carrier can still tell you're in a general area for legitimate network management purposes, the fine-grained location precision that makes individual tracking possible is reduced. This is a privacy capability that didn't exist for iPhone users in any previous iOS version, and it arrived in a point release that most people installed without reading the release notes. The fifth feature on this list is the one with the most direct practical impact for anyone who has ever wanted to understand what their apps are doing when they're not actively using them, because the fifth feature is the iOS 26 Privacy Dashboard, and it is fundamentally different from the app privacy report that existed in earlier iOS versions in ways that matter significantly. The old app privacy report, which arrived in iOS 15, was a statistical summary. It told you that an app accessed your location some number of times in the past week, or that it contacted certain internet addresses. The numbers were accurate, but they weren't actionable in the way that specific incidents are actionable. Seeing that an app accessed your location 43 times this week doesn't tell you when those 43 accesses happened, whether any of them occurred at unusual times, or which specific access to investigate. The iOS 26 Privacy Dashboard is a genuine activity log with timestamps and frequency counts for every sensor access by every app over the past 7 days. You can see that a specific app accessed your microphone on a specific date at a specific time when you weren't using it. You can see that a flashlight app accessed your camera at 2 in the morning. You can see that a game you installed last week connected to 12 different external servers during a session where you only played for 5 minutes. This is the level of specificity that turns privacy monitoring from a general concern into an investigable, actionable audit of your phone's actual behavior. To access it, navigate to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Privacy Dashboard. What you find there may surprise you, particularly if you've never audited which apps hold which permissions and how frequently they use those permissions without you specifically requesting the data they're collecting. The Privacy Dashboard connects directly to another hidden iOS 26 feature that's worth mentioning as part of this same conversation about understanding what's happening on your device: the ability to grant temporary permissions rather than permanent ones. In earlier iOS versions, when you gave an app permission to access your location, contacts, or other sensitive data, that permission persisted until you manually returned to Settings and revoked it. iOS 26 added a prompt system that automatically offers a one-time permission option for certain sensitive categories, meaning you can allow a specific app to access your contacts once for a specific task, without permanently granting it ongoing access to your entire contact list. This is particularly relevant for apps that request permissions during setup for a one-time function, like a new app that needs to import some contacts, and then retain that access indefinitely for purposes that have nothing to do with the original request. The sixth hidden feature is visual intelligence, and it's the one with the widest range of practical applications, and also the one that most clearly demonstrates how much iOS 26 changed what the camera on your phone actually is. Visual intelligence allows your phone's camera to identify and provide information about virtually anything it's pointed at in real time. Point it at a plant and get its name, care instructions, and whether it's toxic to pets. Point it at a dish at a restaurant and get its ingredients, calorie estimate, and a recipe to make it at home. Point it at a product in a store and get price comparisons from multiple retailers before you commit to buying it at the shelf price. Point it at text in another language and get an instant translation without opening any app. These aren't features that require a specialized photography mode or a trip to a settings menu. They're available through a long press on the camera control button on iPhone 15 Pro and later, or through the native camera on iPhone 16 series devices. But the component of visual intelligence that's most frequently described as genuinely changing daily iPhone use isn't the live camera identification. It's the screenshot analysis. When you take a screenshot of anything and then open that screenshot in Photos, there's now a visual intelligence option that analyzes the content of the screenshot and surfaces actionable information from it. A screenshot of an event posted in a group chat gets analyzed, and the event details are automatically added to your calendar. A screenshot of a restaurant someone recommended gets a map view, reservation options, and reviews. A screenshot of a product you're interested in gets shopping comparisons. The intelligence is being applied to screenshots you already take, rather than requiring you to change how you interact with your phone, which is why this particular implementation has resonated with users who had written off AI phone features as requiring too much deliberate effort to be worth the learning curve. Independent testing of visual intelligence found that each analysis cycle increases short burst CPU usage by approximately 12%, but that the duration of each analysis is only 2 to 3 seconds, meaning the battery impact is real but minimal. For iPhone 15 Pro and later, where the camera control button allows hardware-triggered visual intelligence, the precision of the zoom interaction was also improved in iOS 26.5, reducing the increments from 0.5x zoom steps to 0.1x zoom steps. giving photographers and video creators significantly more precise control than the original implementation offered, without changing any setting or needing to learn a new workflow. Here's the broader observation that all 6 of these features point toward, and it's one that reflects something genuinely interesting about how Apple develops iOS in 2026. The announcement stage features, the ones that get shown in keynote presentations and generate pre-order excitement, are not where most of the everyday value in an iOS upgrade actually lives. The everyday value is distributed across a larger number of smaller improvements that arrive throughout the year in point releases, that don't get their own demo slots, that don't appear in the promotional materials, and that can only be discovered by users who either actively seek out what's new or happen to stumble into a settings menu they've never opened before. The gap between the iPhone you're using today and the iPhone you could be using if you knew what was in it is not a gap created by the need for newer hardware. It's a gap created by features that are already on your device, already tested, already available, and quietly waiting for you to turn them on. Call screening eliminates the guessing game of unknown callers. Custom snooze duration removes a fixed limitation that existed for no apparent reason for over a decade. RCS. Encryption closes a security gap that the FBI specifically warned about. The carrier location limiter addresses a category of tracking that your privacy settings had never previously covered. The privacy dashboard transforms privacy monitoring from a statistical summary into a time-stamped, actionable audit. And visual intelligence makes the camera on your phone do something qualitatively different from what any camera app you've previously used could do. None of these required a hardware upgrade. None of them required purchasing anything. They arrived as part of software updates that hundreds of millions of people installed, and then the features sat there, waiting, while those same people continued using their phones the same way they always had. The iPhone you're holding has been updated. What it can do has changed. The only remaining question is whether you're going to use what's already there.